Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the Metal Magdalene with Jet Radio broadcast right here on Metal Messiah Radio. Today, my guest is Ben Hutcherson, guitarist, vocalist of the Colorado-based doomy heavy metal band Khemmis. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
So, Ben, before we get into the interview, we just want to check in on what's going on in the Denver area during this whole corona crisis. How is your state handling things over there?
As best I can tell, we seem to be doing okay. We're certainly not experiencing, the madness that, states like New York, California are. Part of that is due to the fact that we're a fairly sparsely populated state. You know, we've got a few sort of larger cities, but we're by and large a pretty rural state. And my assumption is that helps sort of, slow the spread of the virus. I'm certainly not a biomedical researcher, so I couldn't say for sure. I know that there are, still quite a few cases in the state, but it does seem like our state has it better than at least some.
Well, that's good to hear, and everybody in the Khemmis camp is doing okay?
Yeah, we've all managed to stay, safe and healthy. And in fact, just recently, we're able to all finally get on a Skype call together and see each other for the first time in a month or something like that.
Well, that's good to hear that at least you guys are all staying safe.
Yeah, we don't really have much of a choice in terms of doing much of anything else. So the least we can do is take care of ourselves and our families.
There you go. Okay, so let's get to know a little bit about yourself. So, Ben, prior to Khemmis, when did you start to become interested in some of this more doom-based type metal?
That's a good question, because people assume that if they know you from playing a particular style of music, that you've been listening to it since, the cradle. And truthfully, I did not, sort of grow up listening to doom or doom adjacent music. Sabbath is an integral part of my story, as is the case for a lot of people. But I cut my teeth in the death and black metal scenes. And it really wasn't until probably 23 or 24 that the slow and low style of heavy music really started to speak to me. Getting a little bit older certainly, I think, was part of it. But one of my very best friends, who's sadly no longer with us, a guy named Eddie Riley, turned me on to Neurosis, who I'd listened to before, but they just never really resonated with me. And I distinctly remember him playing the A Sun That Never Sets album while we were hanging out. I think we were sitting in his truck, and it hit me in the right kind of way and really just opened my mind up to this whole other world of music that, as a teenager, I'd almost sort of like turn my nose up at, because at that point I wanted everything faster and more brutal than everything else.
Mm-hmm. And so tell us about when you got started back in 2012 with Khemmis. Why did you guys want to put this band together?
Yeah, I moved out to Colorado. I'm a Southern boy originally, born in Memphis, grew up in North Mississippi, and my wife and I moved out here in 2012 to go to grad school. And I originally had it in my head that I would be a responsible graduate student and sort of set music aside for at least a portion of my graduate career. And that lasted like 3 months. And my wife was like, look, you got to start playing music again. And I was like, what do you mean? She was like, you're getting fat and you're drinking bourbon all the time. Like, we gotta get you out of the house. And so I put an ad on Craigslist and nobody responded. And that was a little disheartening. So I reposted the ad, and some people may know this story. I've reposted the ad with a picture that I'd found of the Jawas from Star Wars carrying a vintage Sun Model T amplifier. And very quickly I had some responses, including one from Dan Byers, who's the bass player for Khemmis. And we made plans to get together over a beer, and we went to True Brewing. Little, of course, did we know that was the brewery where Zach is the head brewer. And I had already met Phil at that point. He was also in the same graduate program that my wife and I were in. We had no idea that we were going to play music together. In fact, he was the sort of last piece of the puzzle, but he was one of the first people I met in Colorado. But so to answer your question, it was a matter of getting my ass out of the house, doing something creative again, and also because I'd played, really extreme music for most of my life, I wanted to, tap into this set of influences that I hadn't really been able to before. Everything from 70s rock and, sort of proto-metal up through the more modern extreme influences. And, that's when Khemmis was born.
So now that you have Zach in the band, what did you do? Turn in your bourbon for beer?
I actually don't drink anymore. Even when I did, I was never a huge beer drinker. But the other two in the band, Phil and Dan, are both sort of aspiring beer connoisseurs, as it were. And Zach, of course, knows just about everything there is to know about beer in this world, and is a truly talented beer maker. So while I don't drink anymore, in my day, I certainly had more than my share of true beer.
So were you in any bands prior to Khemmis?
Not that anybody would know of. I played in some bands around Memphis, played in a sort of technically inclined death metal band called Burial Within, and a blackened sludge band that sang about Lovecraftian nightmares and monsters called Galaxicon. But I don't really expect anyone outside of the Southeast to recognize those names.
So tell us now a little bit about writing music in this band. Like you said, it's a lower tuned, tempos and tuning are different than like your death metals, etc. So what's it like writing music in a band like this?
Surprisingly easy, in so much as we have a collection of guys that are all able to tap into the same sort of creative wellspring to put together, what we think of as the Khemmis sound. It starts with me and Phil sort of amassing raw material in the form of, riffs, lead ideas, or even just general sort of song concepts about how we want a series of notes to make the listener feel or make us feel as we play them. And, when we get to the point where we feel like we have enough of that raw material, we all get together and sort of play around with it and see what pieces fit with what other pieces. And a lot of that tends to start with Zach. He will have listened through a lot of those raw ideas and will often have sort of suggestions about how we can work ideas together that might seem less obvious to me or Phil. And it really is a matter of being able to tap into any number of influences, because we've been doing this for long enough that we trust ourselves and trust each other to really only bring our A game. So people might assume that when writing a Khemmis song, we think, oh, it needs to sound doomy or it needs to sound like Iron Maiden, when in reality it's just sort of finding that inspiration and letting it kind of flow through us.
And now the band has 3 full-length albums out. What are some of the shows and tours you guys have done over the years?
We've done a lot of really cool things. One of my favorite tours we've ever done was the 2018 Decibel Magazine tour. In many ways, we seemed like the sort of odd men out on that tour. It was us, Mercure, Wolves in the Throne Room, and Enslaved. So you had these 3 sort of black metal inclined or black metal adjacent bands, and then us with our low-tuned Iron Maiden stylings, if you will. But really, that tour wound up being amazing. We made very good friends with all the bands, and I've been a huge Enslaved fan since I was a teenager, so it was a real blast to not only see them every night, but to become good friends with them and keep in touch with them. We've done all kinds of really cool festivals. We have had the joys of playing everything from the smaller, sort of more underground or like indie inclined things like Migration Fest here in the U.S. We've done the Decibel Metal and Beer Fest on both coasts. We did Roadburn and Doom over Leipzig in 2018, and we were looking forward to making it back over to Europe. We would have been leaving, I think, today, but obviously that didn't happen. We were going to be part of Desert Fest and headlining the Underworld stage. Unfortunately, that's obviously not happening, but we will make it back overseas and make it to the UK at some point.
And today we're here to talk about your new EP, Doomed Heavy Metal. Why did you decide to put out an EP instead of a full-length album? And of course, with this whole virus thing and shows shut down, it probably was a good decision and to do the EP. So why did you want to put the EP out instead of like a full length?
Well, we have been writing for our next full length for a little while now, but we knew that wasn't going to be coming together, until we're tentatively planning to enter the studio at the end of this year. But we did have some material sort of laying around. We had a couple of singles that had been released in a very limited capacity a few years ago, with Empty Throne being a Decibel Flexi exclusive, and A Conversation with Death being part of a very limited 7-inch split we did with our friends Spirit Adrift. Mm-hmm. We also had the live tracks because at the end of 2018, we did a special sort of mini residency here in Denver called 2 Nights of Doomed Heavy Metal, where the first night we played our slow and low, very overtly doomy songs, and the second night we played our much more up-tempo, aggressive kind of material. And we recorded both nights, so we had all this material, and the four of us love ZZ Top. and we have a special place in our hearts for their Fandango album, which is a collection of singles and live tracks. And we've always liked it because it stands out in their catalog. It's a little bit left of center. It's not your quote-unquote normal album, but it feels like a genuine sort of statement of love for their fans and for, rock and roll and for the blues, because it's something special. It's something that does stand out in their catalog. And I'm especially fond of the live tracks because, ZZ Top obviously started doing this long before I was even on the face of the earth. But being able to sort of vicariously experience what it was like when they were young and really just on fire and in a particular kind of way has always been very awesome to me, because those tracks are raw and they're badass, but they're not overly polished. They are, I think, an authentic representation of that band. And that's the kind of thing that a band who, can bring it live, I think can and should do, is offer that up for people who perhaps haven't been able to see them live. And so we've always all found ourselves enamored by this release, and we were kicking around these ideas of how are we, going to handle this other material that we have sort of sitting around. And in fact, the sort of code name for the release before it was properly titled was Kim Dango. And so with that said, we had all these tracks, and we knew we wanted to sort of tie them together thematically. And so that's where our decision to cover Rainbow in the Dark comes in, because that track, and in a larger sense, Ronnie James Dio, represents what we love about heavy metal, what we love about music in general, the feeling of community that it brings about, the way that good music gives you strength, especially when times are tough. And while we certainly didn't anticipate times being as tough as they are now for nearly everybody in the world, mm-hmm. At the same time, I think good music can give people strength regardless of the sort of larger global circumstances. So because of all that, we found ourselves with an EP or a mini album entitled Doomed Heavy Metal on our hands. And as far as the title, we know how obvious it is, and that's kind of the point, right? It's borderline like Man of War to have the words heavy metal in your album title. But I mean, and this isn't intended to be a release that has a wink and a nod with it, but it is intended to be unabashedly what it is, which is our sort of love letter to heavy metal and the strength that it has given all of us for decades.
And nobody has to ask you to, what does the title of it mean?
Hopefully not. Thus far, nobody has. We're also kind of hoping that it alleviates that question, a little bit. We do get that a lot. Are you guys a doom band? Are you not? And we say no, and then people say, but you are. And we say, but we're not. And then so it's like, look, here it is. Doomed heavy metal. That's what we are. That's what we do. We can't make it any clearer for you.
So what was it like singing the harmonies in Rainbow in the Dark?
Oh, that's all Phil on the recording.
Oh, is it?
It's always easier to match one thing. The same way with harsh vocals, it's always easier for me to layer my own than it is to try to mix and match voices. But it's interesting with the harmonies that we wound up having Phil do on the record, because they're different than what Dio has on the original recording,
right,
which is sort of part of the larger project of taking that song and making it our own. while still paying tribute to Dio. Everything from the choices of notes that Phil sang to the choices of notes that I played in the guitar solo, well, those are part of our sort of a larger attempt to really honor the importance of that original work without just putting out what would essentially be a karaoke track if we just played it straight.
Right. And you guys also have another cover, right? A Conversation with Death. So what is it about this song that you wanted to cover for the album?
Yeah, A Conversation with Death is a really cool song. It's originally an a cappella Appalachian folk song written by a man named Lloyd Chandler, and probably made most famous by Ralph Stanley's version in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? In that movie, it's called Oh Death. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it's still not a song that has musical accompaniment. So Zach is actually the one that had this idea. He's a big fan of all things folky and Southern Gothic-y, as it were, and brought this idea in and said, look, this song is just evil and dark, and I think we could do something cool with it. So I took the original recording, sort of pulled it apart, put it into my recording software, and worked out a series of chords, brought it into practice a couple weeks later, and we hashed it out in a matter of minutes. And that one was really neat because it almost felt like we were given these lyrics and then given the chance to write a Khemmis song around it, which is an opportunity that I think that doesn't happen very often for most musicians. And it was a really cool experience, especially because originally it was just going to be this very limited release track as part of that 7-inch split. And then it wound up being included in a video game that came out last year called Man of Medan, released by Supermassive Games. And it's the sort of theme song to the video game. So we were in the studio actually recording Rainbow in the Dark when all of a sudden we started getting all these notifications on social media, and these gamers had gotten the sort of privilege to debut the game on their various live streams, and all of these gamers were hearing Khemmis for the very first time. So that was pretty wild. So it's cool to have that experience connected to that song, and then finally get to put it out in a more sort of traditional physical format and have it online as well.
So what was it like, because you do have the live versions on there as well, what was the whole mixing process like when you have these live versions on an EP?
I mean, it's a matter of finding the best performances, first of all, and then also thinking about why we were going to pick the songs that we were going to pick. And for a lot of reasons, these songs hold a special place in our fans' hearts. The Bereaved is sort of the song wherein we found ourselves and discovered our sound from our debut album. And Bloodletting and Three Gates, we have always found that they go over very well live. Three Gates, almost without fail, results in a mosh pit, which is funny because we don't play very fast, so it tends to be a very slow mosh pit. But these are songs that the fans love, that they really get energized by, which gives us energy as well. Mm-hmm. And so with that in mind, we sat down with Dave and sort of poured through the raw recordings, and it turned out that the songs that we most wanted to include were the ones that had the tightest performances. So then it was really just a matter of letting Dave do his magic of making it sound professional and polished so that we could release it.
So what kind of subject matter does the band typically write about?
Well, broadly, our songs are about, I guess you could say, the darker side of the human experience. Mm-hmm. We deal with loss, trauma, sort of existential despair and frustration a lot. But we try to do so in such a way that doesn't just paint a bleak picture, because even when things are darkest, there's still going to be those moments of brightness or joy. And we try to strike that balance in our songwriting the same way we try to strike that balance in our lives. At the same time, there are some deeper meanings in some of these songs that we tend to shy away from explicitly detailing, because we really like letting fans establish their own kinds of relationships with these songs. Mm-hmm. And who are we to say that their interpretation of song A or B is not correct just because it's not what we were thinking about when we wrote these lyrics or these notes or whatever. What's more important to us is that we're creating a genuine, set of songs, a genuine artistic statement that resonates with people from all sorts of backgrounds and from all corners of the world.
So tell us a little bit about the cover art on the EP and the artist and what you guys were trying to go for as far as what the art depicts.
We're really happy with how the art came out for this release. For our albums, we have always worked with Sam Turner, who's a very talented artist here in Denver. But because doomed heavy metal is, its own kind of entry into our catalog, we wanted the art to be similarly unique. And so the art we used is actually the art that we originally commissioned for the 2 nights of doomed heavy metal performances here in Denver by an artist who's a very good friend of ours named Cameron Hinojosa. He's a very talented artist that lives just outside of Dallas, Texas. And again, I don't want to sort of over-explain what's going on, but the idea of duality is present in a lot of our material, but especially in this release. The pairing of studio recordings with the live side, the pairing of the doom influence with the more traditional heavy metal or more extreme forms of heavy metal. And the cover art represents that duality as well. Our connections to the darkness and to the light, our connections to Colorado and to the West, as well as to the sort of history of heavy metal.
And now what formats is the EP going to be released on, and where can people go pick it up?
It'll be available in a number of formats. Physical release is being handled by 20 Buck Spin, who have for a long time been our record label, have been our home. Dave Adelson is just a top-notch dude who runs an amazing label, and so this is the sort of capstone release with them. So 20 Buck Spin is releasing vinyl. There are 4 vinyl colorways available.
Wow.
One is already sold out. I think there's a few copies left of the others, and then one will be exclusively available through your local record store for the now delayed record store day. If folks want to get a copy of that, they can just ask their local record store to order that, and that will not be available online, only through brick and mortar stores. It's also available on in a CD digipack directly from 20 Buck Spin. And then the digital release, handled by our new label, Nuclear Blast Records. You can get it on Bandcamp. You can buy it through iTunes. I think that's still a thing. You can stream it through Spotify, Apple Music, all of that good stuff. Pretty much anywhere you can imagine it'll be there.
And Ben, if people want to learn more about the band and what you got going on, what are the best websites for that for people to go to?
Sure, you can go to our website, which is chemisdoom.com. You can also just look us up on all social media. Our handle everywhere is Chemist Doom, all sort of one tag. And I know that I just got done saying they were not exactly a doom band, but we'd already created the social media accounts, so that's the way it is. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I guess that's it. I don't really know what TikTok is. That seems like a thing for young people, so I'm not going to mess with that. You can find us on YouTube. Everywhere.
So there you guys have it. Khemmis have a new EP out called Doomed Heavy Metal. You can get it digitally off of Nuclear Blast Records and the rest of the formats you could get. I assume you have some links up at your websites for people to pick that stuff up, Ben?
Absolutely do, as well as on all of our social media platforms.
There you go. You could grab a copy off of the links from their websites. And Ben, thank you for taking the time to come on the show, and all the best to you and the band.
And thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.